All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. Me and this individual connected very early on in our LinkedIn days, and I've watched his explosive growth. We've got Dr. Bryan Sagray with us today. He has over 21,000, which is pretty crazy, followers on LinkedIn. He has an extensive history from being a foot and ankle surgeon, from being the general manager of a family plumbing business, from being a board member of the Here Brotherhood, also a community mentor and performance coach, but more importantly, the founder of Performance Coach, of Dr. Bryan Sagray, and one-on-one mental health, mindset, performance coaching. Bryan, thank you so much for being here with me today, man. I really appreciate it.
Man, I'm so excited to be here, Keenan. It's crazy how far back our journey goes, but how far we've both come since, we got here. I mean, you've moved back to the contiguous United States from Hawaii. And I've made, actually, I think maybe 2 career pivots since then. And yeah, it's just awesome to finally connect with you on here and just get this out to anybody that wants to hear it and that can benefit from it.
Absolutely, man. Well, I'm super excited to kind of introduce the audience to you. You know, one of the things that I absolutely love about you, Bryan, is your approach to storytelling, and everything that you do from a content creation perspective, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. But more importantly, why don't you give everybody a better understanding of kind of where Bryan came from and a little bit about your background as well?
Cool. Yeah. So basically, I'll give you the short story of the long version. I started out originally, back, this was like after high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was an artist, right? So that was like my first real job, I guess you could say, was I was drawing and painting personally. And then I started drawing for anatomy textbooks, right? Like very peculiar, transition. But then I told myself one day, hey, maybe instead of just drawing this stuff, maybe I could like do this stuff, right? Maybe I could be a doctor or something, which for me, for my family, coming from a mom and a dad, with no formal education at all, growing up on a ranch, owning a plumbing company, my dad was like, yeah, okay, whatever, just follow your dreams and we'll support you. So I went into art, and then I decided, hey, I'm going to go to college. I went to Texas A&M, was an athlete. After school, then I thought I was going to be a professional athlete, like a lot of silly people do at one point. And I chased that dream for a while, made some money doing it, had a lot of fun, got to travel a lot, got a few sponsorships, and then just burnt out. That was like the first time I burnt out in my life as an athlete. And it was more of a physical burnout than a mental burnout, but I think there was probably a component of both. And that really is what propelled me then into medicine, because I told myself, okay, finally go back to where you started, go into medicine. That was maybe what your original calling was. So I did. I poured everything I had into that. Medical school, residency, double fellowship trained, became the residency director, professor, everything I thought I wanted, success by society's standards, but then realized that I wasn't really fulfilled. And at the same time that this is all transpiring personally in my mind, unfortunately, I lost my dad to his second fight of lung cancer right at the time that I was at that pinnacle. But I was also kind of questioning, is this what I want to do? Which for a lot of people may seem crazy, right? Like you can imagine literally multiple 6 figures in debt of medical school loans, living in, Georgetown, very expensive. My wife, God bless her, working 2 jobs to help pay to literally put food on the table. And I'd go through all that. Then dad passes away, and I said, hey, what the heck? We just bought a $800,000 house and put 20% down. No big deal. I'll just walk away from everything. And I'll
Jeez.
go back and I'll go back to Texas, and I will go from medicine, which I always joke around and tell people is fluid running through pipes. And I'll go into plumbing, which is fluid running through pipes. And I'll take over the, almost 50-year-old family business, because mom and dad were high school sweethearts. And when he died, she was broken and she could barely function, much less keep this big business going. So I walked away and stepped in as the owner and CEO of the plumbing business, and grew that, and we sold it. And then basically after 6 months, that's when I came to LinkedIn and we met. That was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And after about 6 months of being, quote, retired, my wife said, get out of the house or find something to do, right? You gotta stop this. And so I went back and kind of got into the med device industry for a little bit, did some writing and publishing, still wasn't really fulfilled. And one day I had a deep conversation with a really close friend of mine, and he said, "Bro, listen, you've been throughout your life being coached by people, and as the residency director, you've been coaching people pretty much your whole life for free. Why don't you see what this feels like to help people and to help other people achieve, and maybe make a living out of it too?" And so about 5 months ago, I guess now, I went out on my own, right, as an entrepreneur and launched this business. And man, it's been awesome. It's that's where we are now. I know you have a similar journey with Francis and you and your sister and doing what you guys are doing. And man, the fear of the unknown is an incredibly scary thing, but it is a fantastic inspiration motivator too.
I think that's a great place for us to kind of start today, is around the topic of fear. So I want to kind of reverse into your story a little bit. So I saw a post of yours on LinkedIn where you were talking about making hundreds of thousands of dollars. You had the GT3, you had all of the stuff, but then you found yourself completely unfulfilled and you needed to make a
Yep.
pivot. So what
Yep.
were some of those early experiences that you had from a fear perspective and being like, man, did I just work all this time to get all the stuff and then it's not fulfilling me the same way that I thought it was? What was that like?
Yeah, it's incredible. I think this is something that, I think a lot of people can actually relate to this. I think some people may say, oh, yeah, it's easy for him to say that, right? Because he's already done it. But I will tell you that, yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I grew up, racing motorcycles, and I've always been a big car guy. My dad raced open wheel cars professionally, and so I was always a car guy. And when I started being successful financially, I mean, business was good, right? And I had the GT3 RS, right? I had the, Italian cars. I had the vacation houses. We traveled wherever we wanted to go. But what was amazing is every time you want more, the mountain gets taller, the car gets more expensive, the wife's purse gets more expensive, the ring gets bigger. But what happens is the more and more that you do that, for me at least, the more I found myself really like living someone else's life, because that's not, at least for me, how I was brought up. I mean, I was literally brought up on a ranch, feeding cows, fixing fences. And I had deviated so far from that that I think once I experienced it, it was a lot of fun. But I'll tell you what, it came with it so much unnecessary responsibility. And so what happened was, I realized in that moment, it was literally a Sunday night. I know exactly what post you're talking about. It went crazy. And I remember telling my wife, literally, I'd just been on call for a week. I had done like 27 surgeries in a week. I was coming off call. All the patients were taken care of. And my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm packing up all my stuff. I quit." She goes, "What do you mean you quit?" She goes, you never give up." I said, "I didn't say I'm giving up. I said, I quit. I quit on my terms. I'm not giving up. I
Mm.
choose to carry on, but I'm carrying on my terms. There is no give up. This is quitting to serve a better purpose." And I walked in the next day. I mean, I in the first 4 or 5 years that I'd been practicing, that was about 5 or 6 years in. I mean, we had cleared like $3 or $4 million, paid my student loans off, and I just walked away because I was miserable. I'd come home every night, and first thing I did was pour a drink, right? Like, that's no way to live. I had stress. I had no real internal joy. The only way I could find joy was by buying more stuff or going on vacation or having a cocktail. And I just knew it wasn't sustainable. So I packed it up. And at that point, what I thought was missing in my life was serving, educating, and teaching. I thought that was what I was missing. So that was when I left and took the role on to be the residency and fellowship director, which that actually was very fulfilling. Um, and I think that if I wouldn't have lost my dad, I think I would, and I feel like I'm still educating and serving now in a capacity.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if he wouldn't have passed away, I would have come back to Texas at some point anyways. But I think that was a true inflection point to me where I felt compelled to come home and help mom. Um, but yeah, up until that, it really was everything that I was doing in life was externally driven, right? Like chasing happiness, but not really having joy, which for me now I realize comes from inside, not outside. And that was motivated by fear, right? Like I was fearful that I wasn't successful enough. A doctor had a nicer car than me. He went here. It's like more and more and more. And it was very fear driven. And then when I flipped it and I came from a place of serving, it just changed my life.
Man, that's so powerful because, being 32 years old and being an entrepreneur, especially in this world of social media, I feel like we are consistently comparing ourselves to a global community. And that's not something that we had to experience years ago. And so now I see so many people who are motivated by the idea of wanting to raise the bar to be ahead of other people. So let's talk a little bit about something that kind of caught my attention there was, did you ever find yourself subconsciously or consciously competing with the other doctors to be able to kind of tally up the things, to be able to pull up in the GT3 RS, the looks that you got that day? What was that like?
100%. I mean, I think it's like, I think at first, at least for me, I think it's probably being done subconsciously. At least that's what I think. Like, I don't think I was aware that I was doing that, right? Like the way I was raised was, I always, when I was younger, it was tough, but I was always a truck guy, right? I was a Jeep Rubicon guy. I was getting dirty, playing in the mud, right? Hunting, fishing. And so when I got out to California, I remember, I had this big signing bonus, this 6-figure signing bonus, and I got out there and we used that signing bonus to pay the rest of my loans off. And I was still driving my Jeep Rubicon with big tires and scratches all down the side. And then I'd pull up to work and it was like, I just didn't feel like I fit in. And so for me, it started with like trying to fit in. It was like I pulled in and it was BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Lexus, Mercedes, everything. And I was like, okay, like I wasn't thinking about it from a money standpoint, but I was like, I'm getting out of this Jeep with mud on it, wearing cowboy boots and blue jeans. And these guys are getting out of their, their European cars wearing their scrubs. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here, right? And so subconsciously, I just wanted to emulate those people that were around me instead of one of the convictions that I live by now, which is if you truly believe in something, like sometimes you have to stand alone, right? And that's okay. And I just wish I would have kept that Jeep, because I had some good times in that Jeep. But yeah, it was. And then it became conscious, right? Then it started subconscious, and then it became conscious where, the one guy gets the 5 Series BMW, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but I'm going to get an M5, you know what I mean? And so then it was like strategically trying to outdo someone with material things, which never is going to end well, right? Not to be funny, but my wife, who is super frugal and so understanding of how I was, would never get upset, but she knew I would eventually figure it out on my own. But I just wish she would have told me earlier because she's always right anyways. But yeah, it was, Keenan. It started out subconscious and then it became conscious until I finally and then it went the other way, right? Then I realized like, okay, wait a minute, this is me actively doing this, but I'm not actually wanting to.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple moments in my life where I have put a ton of external value on the outside thing, the car, the accomplishment, the yada yada. And one of the scariest moments, because we're talking about fear for me, is when you accomplish those things, you recognize that you tried to fill this hole inside you with this item and it just disappears like a black hole. Like that is one of the scariest things that I've come across. And it's really been a sobering moment for me many times because I recognize that I've been approaching these things all wrong and I'm not getting the fulfillment based on what everybody else is prescribing for me.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Like I still felt lost and empty and like alone when those times would happen. And then what would happen is you would get to the top of this mountain or this sports car or this vacation, or whatever it was. And you would get there and you would think this object is going to be super shiny. And you're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And wait a minute, now this stupid car that I bought, the tires are $800 a piece and
Exactly.
the oil change costs $5,000. Like, what was I thinking? Like, how is it possible that I'll never forget the first time I took that car in for service and I was like assuming, oh yeah, it's got to be all maintenance is included when you're dropping multiple 6 figures on a car. And I get the bill and I'm like, how is it like 5 figures and you had the car for like a day, right? And so, yeah, you just keep chasing it. And I think it's almost like like the greyhounds that chase the fake rabbit at the track. They're never going to catch it. And that's the same thing with happiness. Like you're never going to catch it if you're trying to chase it. You just have to, learn how to create it, and you're right. Just to go back to it real quick with social media, one thing that I've learned is I can't imagine, because there is a lot of highlight reels on social media. There is a lot of people that are being things that they're not. And it's like the person who has, a relationship on the side or who's living a double life. It is hard enough for me to show up to LinkedIn every day and create the content that I create. Same thing for you, right? So I speak the full truth and I tell people I can't imagine how hard it would be to show up here and be someone that I'm not. That would take so much more effort to write a fake story, to tell something that's untrue, to post a photo that's been like Photoshop. Like that's got to take so much mental brain power for people to be something that they're not when it's so much easier to just be who you are. And then you never have to, you don't leave any cookie crumbs. You're not telling white lies. You don't have to keep your story straight. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think the generation that we live in now, social media has really been what really threw a wrench into everything.
I mean, we spend so much time curating these versions of ourselves for other people's consumption, and 99% of the time, those people aren't even thinking about us. Do you know what I mean?
Correct.
It's very interesting when I look at social media, I see people putting out pictures with filters on, and it's like, that was interesting. But when I think about it from my personal perspective, I am so consumed with what I am thinking about all the time that most of those posts are white noise. Right.
Right.
And it's like, how
Yep.
much effort do we spend putting effort in time into curating those things when nobody's really paying attention to them?
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think like for me, it's the exact same way. And I think there's so much on social media. I'm only on LinkedIn, but there's so much on social media. And this content always does so well. And it's funny to me on how to do LinkedIn, how to write on LinkedIn, how to create content, how to write a hook. And I'm like, why are people doing that? Just tell your story. I mean, sometimes I'll just open up my phone and swipe through old pictures and a memory will come to my mind, right? Or I'll be chilling at home and it's a Friday night and a certain Tom Petty song comes on. It reminds me of the first concert I ever went to with my dad. And then that's a post. It's like the best content that you'll ever put on social media is content you get from living your life.
Oh, man.
Or, you know what I mean? Or from memories of your life, not from other people's lives, from your own.
I was actually, so at the time of recording this last weekend, Alex Hermosi, who is blowing up on social media as well, released a $100 million leads book. And part of his content strategy, which he released, which I was super excited for, he's like, for the first time, I'm going to lift up the skirt, and you guys are going to see behind the curtain about the Alex Hermosi content schedule and what I do. And I consumed his information thinking that it was going to be like the hacks and the tips, but he echoed exactly what you just said. He's like,
Yep.
the only time that you can post content is based on what you've actually done. And
Right.
that was a light that went off in my head. I was like, oh, wow. But it echoes what you're talking about and talking about your own story. Because so
Correct.
many people, like I've seen many influencers on LinkedIn, spend so much time talking about tips and tricks and hooks and how to copy people's structure and the stories that they tell. But often we dilute all of our unique value by trying to duplicate or copy and paste other people's versions of themselves, which aren't in alignment with us.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And I was watching a podcast the other day that was brilliant. It was with, I'm sure you know him, Ed Milet, and of course, John C. Maxwell, right? Everybody knows John C. Maxwell. And it was one of the most phenomenal podcasts I had ever watched. So many amazing tips in there. And one of the most amazing things that Ed Milet said, and his content is incredible. I mean, he's a machine and his stuff, he does all of his own stuff. And one of the things he said that was so moving to me is if you want to do really well on social media, you want to tell a me story with a you meaning. In other words, like if you look at my content or Alex's content, I will tell a story about me, but then I'll say something about like, I went through this struggle and here's how you can avoid it, right? Or here's how you can change your life today and not make the mistake I did. So you're still talking about yourself, but I think success in life comes when you talk about me, but significance, impact, and value comes when you talk about them. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, that's when I really shifted. I watched Alex's his live also, and I was cracking up, and he was talking about taking the kimono off, and
Yeah.
but it was so true though. You thought it was going to be some big, like algorithm or protocol, and plug this in here, and he was literally like, I just talked about when my business failed, when my gym almost went under, when we grew during COVID, like, and that's what he shares, or he talks about his wife, and I think that if you can find a way to tell your story but in a way that teaches someone something or it gives them value or it helps them avoid a mistake that you made, That's the gold right there.
I mean, you just do such an amazing job in telling the stories, but like you just articulated, the way in which you connect it back to a version that is valuable to others, I think is so awesome because you're always coming from like a serving attitude to be able to serve your network. And I think one of the biggest problems that people have today is I'm going to post content and it's all about me, right? Rather than trying to serve the people that I can connect with. Because one of the things that I often talk about is, especially when we talk about like mental health, everybody has their own version of mental health. But when people open up about their experiences, often we've been through those same experiences and we see ourselves in that as well, which is so powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's always very similar too. Like it's, if you want to impress people, you typically talk about your successes. But if you want to impact them, you talk about your vulnerabilities, your failures, your struggles, and those types of things. And I think it's exactly like you said. It's like I laugh sometimes when I see these posts that are like, here's how I made $180,000 in 3 days or whatever. And I'm like, that's great. It's grabby, but tell me like how I can do it, right? Or relate it to something about, a way that it can impact me now. It changes, it helps me make a decision that changes my worldview or changes my practice. And I think the only way you really can be an influencer, it's not by talking about your successes, it's sharing like what you did wrong and how you came back from that. Because if people are succeeding and doing well, they're not looking for answers. People that are on social media that are looking for answers, it's because they have questions they need answered or they're struggling for something, right?
Right.
So they don't care. They don't care all the successes that you had. They want to see your comeback story because they're stuck where you were stuck. So show them how to get over that. Don't just tell them about your success. Show them how you got there after you tripped. You know what I mean?
100%. I completely agree with that. I mean, it's like I would love to consume everybody else's like hero stories and the stories of their success, but those don't help me get any closer to where I'm going. And so I
Right.
want to use that topic to kind of transition here. So one of my favorite quotes is you make drastic change when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of different, right? And so when you've made a couple of your pivots from a professional perspective, what were you going through tactically to kind of fortify yourself to be able to make the pivots that you were looking to make towards aligning towards like your true happiness?
Yeah, so that's huge. I will tell you that the it's amazing. So you would think it would be like learning a new skill, right? Or getting another certification or getting more letters behind your name. But honestly, it was another post that I shared a couple of weeks back, and what kind of led up to when I made my first big pivot was coming from an athletic background, right? I always kept myself in really good physical shape, which for me, when I was in really good physical shape, as an athlete, you're in great shape yourself. I mean, that when you're in the gym and you're moving heavy weight and you're doing a lot of stuff, like I get more from lifting and I get more from heavy physical exertion mentally than I do physically, right? And so every time I've made one of those big pivots, the only way that I was able to get myself in the process to be able to do that is I leaned into building my mind and my body. I mean, literally, every time I've made a big pivot from one industry to another, it wasn't taking a course and boning up or studying up. It was literally getting back into the gym, getting more sleep, right? I tell people the two biggest performance enhancing drugs in the world are the bedroom and the kitchen.
Mm.
And it's like, it sounds really corny, but every single time that I had to make a big career pivot, I literally trained my mind and my body. And it all started with physical work. But then the more I physically got back into shape, the more it started making me mentally tough, right? And that's what it was all about for me. And the way I was able to do that, and this is, I think, the big take home is I started documenting my life, right? So journaling, I know it sounds super hokey, but what I was able to do is I've been doing it for about 7 years now. And I started going back through my journals and looking through my journals, and there were patterns in there. There were periods in my life where I was winning, and I would look back and I'd be like, oh, I wasn't drinking as much. I was sleeping more. I was getting up and going for a run in the morning. I was hanging out with this set of friends. And then I would have these periods in my journals where I was really down and life was not good. And I was writing everything down, and I was like, I was stopping for fast food. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't hanging out with my family. And so I went back through and found these patterns and just replicated them. And for me, that was what always gave me the strength to pivot in life. Was I started taking care of myself physically and mentally, and then I was able to move forward.
Man, I can't tell you how instrumental the gym has been in my life. I've built a habit of going to the gym every single day. And when I don't do that, I feel so out of whack because I haven't exerted myself physically. And whenever I think about mental health in general, I know Joe Rogan has a clip that's floating around the internet right now where he talks about scientists have found that one of the best treatments for depression is exercise. It is so difficult for you to be depressed when you are actively moving and getting about, being outside and lifting weights and running and jumping and just being active. And I just think
Yep.
that more people need to make the connection between the mind and the body as being two whole things. Because I know even in the world of medicine, right, there's always been an approach that these two things are separate and they're not connected. And I think that that is just a lesson that we are slowly learning, but I wish we would have learned it quicker.
Yeah, it's a bad way to approach it to have them split like that. I mean, I will say that I know exactly what you're talking about. And even as far back as like Dale Carnegie, I mean, Dale Carnegie had this quote where he talked about if you want to get over depression and fear and worry, get outside and move, right? Like not necessarily just like anything physical, but go be social, go to dinner with your friends, right? Go serve the community, go to a canned food drive. If you isolate and you stay at home or you stay by yourself, you are going to self-medicate. And that's either going to be with social media, with alcohol, it's going to be with something other than what's going to feed you and move you forward with a purpose, right? And so I will tell you that physical exercise, and especially for me, like in the gym, it there is not anything else for me that works that well. And I think part of it goes back to the like you said, habits, right? Or discipline, right? It's like you will fail in life based on your systems and your routines and your habits. That is going to be what makes or breaks you, right? Motivation is not going to be what wins. It's going to be what you do daily. The things that you do every day are the things that build you or break you, those habits, right? And so if you can physically take care of your body, right? I'm not saying you need to be like shredded or whatever, but if you physically can take care of your body and maintain your health, which takes hard work, then you probably are successful in other areas of your life. And that's not me poking fun at any one certain person or group of people. It's just true. It's like if I pick you up at the airport and I jump into your car and we've never met and your car is a total wreck, your desk is probably a total wreck, right? That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means if someone has the dedication to eat well, take care of their body, maintain their well-being, keep themselves in a good state of mind, they're probably doing other things in their life well also. So start with yourself first and then see what happens.
I think this is a perfect opportunity because I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into habits. So I was on social media the other day and I saw a clip. Have you ever seen the movie Limitless?
Yes.
Okay, so they were talking about what happened when he first took his Limitless pill. They're like, he didn't go out and start making a ton of money. He didn't go out and start trading stocks. He went home and cleaned his home first because clutter has dramatic effects on how we perceive the world and how we navigate just as human beings in general. And so one of the things that I think about is the habits that we build are very interesting. But going back to your point about being physically active and seeing somebody who's in shape, what you're recognizing is a lagging indicator of work that these guys have done over a long time horizon that is compounded into the version that you see in front of them. And I love the topic of lagging indicators because in the world of social media, of dopamine hits, of things that we get so quick, I do not think people put enough emphasis on the process of delayed gratification that leads to the results that we're looking for.
Yeah, this is so good because I think when people think about habits, delayed gratification, detaching from outcomes, all of those things, which is so important, people, and James Clear talks about this, people talk about building habits, right? But one of the best ways to build a habit, or one of the best types of habits to have, is to remove obstacles, right? Or to make things easier for yourself. So to build a good habit, if you want to go to the gym in the morning, or you want to start eating a good breakfast in the morning, before you go to bed tonight, take the frying pan out, right? Like prep some of the food, slice up the vegetables, right? Or put your gym bag next to the door. You know what I mean? Get the coffee ready to go. So in the morning, you just have to push the button. You know what I mean? It's like you building good habits and getting good results isn't just a question of adding something else. Most of the time, you'll get there by removing a lot of stuff. And I think that we focus so much of our time, we focus on things that we can't control and things that are non-essential. But if you focus on really what's essential and you remove, like you said, or you delay gratification, you train yourself to understand that, right, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It compounds. And you can't, and one of the best ways to compound interest, right? It's like, just like with the stock market, is you make these small changes over time. And I remember I had a math professor one time when I was an undergrad, and he told us something about, like, would you be a janitor for the next year, right? Would you be a janitor for the next year if, when the first day you showed up to work, I paid you $1, and the second day I doubled it, and then I doubled it every day after that? And everyone's like, no, I wouldn't be a janitor for $1 a day. Well, what you don't realize is, like, by 30, 40 days in, you're making like a couple $100,000. I mean, you're making crazy money, right? Just by compounded interest. And it works the same way in your life. I mean, you don't have to make really big changes to get big outcomes. In fact, the smaller changes that you make over a longer period of time, that's where the big reward comes from, right? Because you don't burn out. If you take, like, not to hate on David Goggins, right? The only reason I bring up David Goggins is because there's been scientific studies that show that what he's been able to accomplish, which is phenomenal, he's in 3% of the population that has that kind of a mindset where they can push through anything. And that's the guy that I want as my special forces. I get it.
100%.
But when he talks about taking massive action to get massive results, the other 97% of the population is going to get massive burnout. And so then they're going to do something, and they're going to lose 30 pounds, and they're going to succeed, and then they're going to gain 50. Then they're going to start a new job, and they're going to hit their quota, and then they're going to burn out. And so I think the answer is not taking massive action. The answer is taking consistent, purpose-driven, intentional action that creates momentum, and then you use leverage. And that's how you get massive results. But you start small. You don't take massive action, because then you're done. I've been there.
And I think so many people have been there, and even me personally today. So last couple of days, I've been going super hard on all of the Alex Hormozy trainings. And I've found myself working from, like, when I wake up at 5 a.m., I take a break during the mid-afternoon to hit the gym. I come back home and I work, right? And I was having this conscious conversation with myself last night. I'm like, I wonder how long you can continue to do this. And then I woke up this morning after not getting the best amount of sleep. And naturally, I was like, man, I am really dragging here. And this makes it so much more possible for me to give up on the work that I've been doing, because the massive action climb, when you get to the top, you're often tired as can be. And then there's nothing but to do but then to relax. But then that obviously kind of puts us back at the place where we were. And then if we feel like we have that internal comparison of not being able to take massive action, maybe we start that internal voice that says, like, dude, we're doing it again, and yada, yada, if that makes sense.
I think that's exactly how it happens. I think that's why. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not times in your life where we all have to sprint, right? Like, we know that. Like, there's going to be no matter what kind of career you have, what kind of lifestyle you have, there's always going to be periods in this ultra marathon of life where you have to sprint. But you're absolutely right. And I feel it too. I mean, since launching my business, I've neglected a lot of stuff. The one thing I haven't neglected is me personally, but there's been days where I used to be really good with, like, in the morning, I would wake up, and I always had this practice of, like, sending a voice message to a close friend, like starting off with some gratitude or something in the morning, and I found myself not doing that anymore. I'm back at it now, but it was just like it was with you. I was pushing so hard, and then I went to wake up one morning, and I noticed that I had no energy. And then even the small things that I wanted to do, it wasn't that I didn't want to do them. I, like, physically was like brain fog. I couldn't do them. And I told myself, you see what happens? Like, but see, for me, because I built these systems, like you talked about, these habits, I have the past documentation. So I have these guardrails. And so, like, you can self-coach, right? I can catch myself now when I know that I'm slipping. And so I think that's what's important too. But you get there with mindfulness, with personal development. It doesn't mean that you and I are perfect. It means that I know when I'm slipping up, and then I can autocorrect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so I mean, you're a living example of it. I mean, it's you're trying to do something good. You know that that's great information that he put out there, and you leaned into it really hard, and then you realized, ooh, maybe I should have blocked an hour a day for this only. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that maybe my like reticular activating system has been picking up on recently was the only objective of entrepreneurship in general is to not quit in the game. And I think that's an interesting analogy because when we talk about building habits as an example, we think that we want to take massive action to build these things, but we often end up dropping them because we overexert ourselves and we don't have the consistency over a long enough time horizon to actually see the fruit start to grow on the seeds that we have planted. And I think that's really interesting because so many people, I mean, one of the great examples that I love to kind of refer to is like New Year's, when everybody has like that fresh start effect in their mind and everybody's like, I'm going to get fit and I'm going to do it. And then it's like, I always at that time kind of lean back to the thing of like, all right, let's see where everybody's at in March, because I guarantee you people aren't going to be coming to the gym still. And it's like, I even create that analogy from fitness, but it goes across everything that we kind of try to approach in life in general.
It really does, and I think that's why sometimes if you think about life, right, and the world in general, like there's seasons, right? Like everybody knows there's fall, winter, spring, summer. Things in life, in your life and in the world, they happen in seasons, right? And so I think like right now, the pandemic, after the pandemic, all the wacky stuff going on in the world, people dividing each other. I think we're in a winter right now, right? And so what people, I think what you just spoke to about planting seeds and then, the fruit that you grow is always the sweetest. What people don't realize is that if you know anything about, farming, right? When you're planting in one season so that in the later season you can reap what you sowed, right? And so when you're on the downslope of your life, we're talking about entrepreneurship. When you're on the downslope of your life, you want to be harvesting.
Mm.
You don't want to be 60 years old or 70 years old and be in the middle of a winter or still be planting, right? You want to be harvesting at that point. And the way you do that is you prolong that growing season, that planting season by planting and doing that process very precisely, very slowly, very meticulously. And you get that process just right so that then later on in life, when everybody else is still figuring out how to plant, you're just out there picking fruit all day long. You know what I mean? And so as an entrepreneur, that's a great thing to really learn early on is it's not about winning. It's not about how fast you can get to where you're going. It's literally about, can I keep going? And the only way you can keep going is if you literally go slow. You can't run the Formula One race car all day long. It'll break,
Yeah.
right? You have to bring it in from the track and let it rest.
I mean, I think the perfect analogy that I know everybody can connect with here is we were told a childhood story, right? The tortoise and the hare. The hare is
Exactly.
sprinting off, he's doing all this different kind of stuff, and by the time he gets to the finish line, he's absolutely exhausted. But guess what? The tortoise comes creeping past him because he's been chilling the entire time, planting those seeds along the way, pacing himself, and doesn't actually get burnt out. So I think that's an absolutely amazing analogy. One thing that I want to pivot to really quick is kind of the idea of habits making our life boring. So one thing that I hear a lot of people talk about is, habits in themselves sound great, but I don't want to be stuck in the same type of routine all the time. I want to have the spontaneity of life. I want to have the excitement. I want to have those different moments. And if my life is so routine, I'm never going to have that. So it's not something that I want. So what is your perspective on that? And is there an actual truth inverse to that?
Yeah, this is great. So actually, it's so funny. So I posted today on that in life you don't become a master or an expert. You pursue becoming a master or an expert. And what I talked about actually in that post was, and a lot of people have talked about this, Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about this, the way you separate good from great is, and it goes back to athletics is where I learned it. People that are really, really, really good at something, they love the mundane and the boring. I'm telling you right now, I don't care what anybody says. You do not get great at anything in life if you don't love the mundane and the boring. And people say, well, yeah, I don't believe that. I tell them, do you think when I was a professional athlete that I wanted to count my calories, that I wanted to lift weights every day, that I wanted to run 120 miles every week. No, of course, I'd go to the sauna, go to the ice therapy, no, I did not want to do that every day, but I did it. And I learned over time that if I could tolerate the mundane and the boring and someone else couldn't, I was going to beat them. Now, that didn't mean that you can't throw some uncertainty and some variety and some spice into your life. It just means that, I hate to break it to people, and I'm not trying to make anybody go, oh my God, I'm giving up, wave the white flag. But honestly, and it doesn't, some people will say embrace the suck. That I don't agree with. But you have to get really good at the mundane and boring. I mean, if you want to be a good writer, you have to write a lot, right? Michelangelo famously said, right, if people knew how long I've worked to get to where I am, they would not think I was a genius at all, right? I mean, these people work hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of hours to get to where they do, but all we see is the masterpiece, and we think that they're talented and they're born with that type of talent. No, they're not. He would sit and draw and paint endlessly, right? And you think that every single time that Michelangelo picked up a paintbrush or a chisel and a hammer, that he was excited about doing that? No, he was not. But he knew that if he wanted to be one of the best that ever lived, he would tolerate that and the other guy wouldn't, right? So I really do think that those people that can tolerate consistent, maybe not their favorite thing to do every day, they are going to go far if you can tolerate that boredom and that mundane. It doesn't mean, though, that you don't build in some fun, but learn to tolerate boredom. That's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't wholeheartedly agree with that more. One of the things that I've learned from Alex Ramosi was a great analogy that he gave about entrepreneurship. So he talks about the lifetime story of somebody who was working a day job, right, a regular 9 to 5 in their career, and then made a switch to entrepreneurship. And he talks about how some of our early behaviors and the rewards that we were given were anchored in the wrong places. I'll give you an example. When you're an entrepreneur, you're starting your business, you are always looking for how to move forward. And then often what you're working on isn't working, so you pivot to something else, and then something starts to work. And then naturally, our brains create this idea that the change and the switch of what we're doing is what gives us the reward. And so many entrepreneurs out here today are obviously consistently switching between tasks and doing different stuff because we have an anchored experience that we are rewarded for doing things differently, which is wild. Now, I'm going to go back to Alex Ramosi's training one more time. So one of the things that he talks about in the process of scaling, so in the last couple of years, he sold a majority of his big business called Gym Launch. And in the training that I was watching this morning, he was like, it's interesting because the company who now owns Gym Launch, they've grown 42% over the last year. And let me tell you what they haven't done. Anything new. They've done more of the same. So they were like, what is working? How can we do more of this? And then if you don't have more of it, then you do what you're doing better. And the last thing that we attempt is doing something new. And hearing that perspective was just like eye-opening to me because it's like the roadmap to success is in front of you by doing more of what you're already doing. But it might be mundane like you're talking about. But then beyond that, it's doing more of that stuff better. And then the last thing that you want to do is actually pivot. And if 100%. You hear the successful people talk about this stuff, it's like obviously success leaves clues, but everybody is just so concerned about like, what can I do quickly to pivot directions? And is that going to bring me the result I want? Once again, kind of tying it back to that experience that we had that we're rewarded for changing things up, which is so dangerous.
Yes. No, it is. I mean, there was literally a post yesterday that went viral with someone saying the exact opposite of what you said. I didn't even comment on it and I wanted to. They were talking about like how good leaders and successful companies, they're that way because, and they put it in quotes, we don't just do it the same way we've always done it because that way works, right? They want to change it and pivot it. And I think that that's really, really, really bad advice to give because look at Warren Buffett. Look at these people that have literally, he will tell you that all the money that he's made have literally been in like the same 10 companies that he invested in at the very beginning. And he just keeps milking that cow. Okay. And so if something in life is working and it's working really, really well, why would you change that? Why would you not find a way to make that system maybe even a little bit better? Look at what we've done with the internal combustion engine, right? It's still very, very inefficient. But look at where it came from and where it's come to now. And then people want to talk about climate change, which I'm not saying is not important, but take something that already works and make it better and get every single thing you can out of it. Cars used to get 3 miles to the gallon. Now some get like 60, right? And so it's like, take it as far as you can. And then when you start to get a diminishing return, then pivot, right? But if every single time something goes wrong or you fail, or you go from making 180,000 a month to 160, that doesn't mean rebrand, change everything. That just means that maybe the systems you have in place just need to be tuned up a little bit, right? And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I just laugh every time I hear people talk about how the best leaders, the best companies are constantly changing, constantly evolving. They're changing and evolving, but they're changing and evolving the systems that are already working. They're making those processes better, and they're spinning off things that have already worked. They're not changing, right? They're evolving and iterating. There's a big difference.
I mean, there's a gigantic difference in that. And that's been a huge maturation process for me, is recognizing that change is not always good, but the right types of change in small incremental increments is something that will take you to the next level. I mean, because if you have a business, let's say that you're closing 20% of the people who come through the door, and now you start closing 25% of the people who come through the door, that might seem like a tiny change. But when you look over a long enough time horizon, like you said, it's that compounding factor which makes the biggest difference. But often we're just not patient enough to be able to kind of execute on that vision.
Yeah, and I think too that there's a lot of learning and humility. I'm not saying that you want to go down with the ship, right? But there is a lot to be learned where if you're doing something that is working really well, but it's happening really slowly, give it a little bit of time first, like you said, because it will start to incrementally, it'll exponentially build on itself. But if when one thing goes wrong, you change immediately, that is really that's you're never gonna find success that way. I remember hearing I don't remember who it was that said it. I think it was the CEO of Microsoft, and he said, I was watching a podcast today. He said that one of the biggest success stories for entrepreneurs and really successful companies, he used this phrasing, being able to see around a corner. And what he was talking about was knowing, like you said, exactly when the time is to actually make the pivotal change where you say, I'm not going to go down with the ship. We have to completely rechange. And you see that, okay, we have to go with automation and AI. That's not going to be a trend. That's going to be the new way, right? The internet is not going to be a fad. The internet's not going away. And so it's like these companies that are able to make a huge pivot, right? Those companies do really well, but the ones that keep pivoting, you're never going to, those big corporations that really blow up and do successful, if you go back and look at certain times, it's usually going back to the winter. Almost every successful company has made a big pivot during the Depression, during a recession. They make a pivot during a winter when they have the ability to buy when the market's down, or they have the ability to influx cash when the market's down and shift into a new industry. That's when you make a big change and a big pivot, not when your company's doing really well and you have a bad month. Don't change then. That happens to companies all the time, right?
Exactly. I mean, you've just been dropping so much gold here, which I think is just so phenomenal. And so thank you so much for bringing so much value in some of these conversations that we've been having. The next topic that I want to talk about was kind of something that I saw on social media. And I saw the post going viral again. It was on TikTok, but then I saw it also reposted on LinkedIn as well, which I thought was interesting. It was talking about the idea of self-improvement and self-development as being something that we've been sold, and that people shouldn't buy into this idea because as you are right now is good enough. And naturally, when I saw that post, I was like, this is so interesting to me because so many people have ingrained habits that are not serving them. And there are so many opportunities for you to continue and grow and change. And even from a genetic and atomic perspective, I heard somebody one time say, and you can confirm this for me or not, but they were talking about like every 7 years, your body replaces every single cell in itself. So technically, if you are 21 years old, you are 3 different humans at that point in time. If your body is always growing and changing and developing, why should we not as people continue to grow and develop as well?
Yeah, that's another one of those ones. It's like a trigger for me when I see the posts, and they always do so well that are like, today is going to be your day. You are good enough, right? It's like, I'm not saying to not think that where I am today is not a good place to be, right? Because you do want to be content where you are while you pursue what you want. That has to be an underlying theme. But I will tell you, one of the biggest ways to stay humble, right? One of the biggest ways to continue to succeed in life is the doer is the one that learns, right? That if you want to stay humble, you have to accept that you have more to learn, right? So if you be a student of life, that doesn't mean like just reading books. That means, if yesterday you walked 10,000 steps, maybe today you walk 10,500, and then tomorrow you walk 9,800, whatever. But to constantly think that you are good enough, that is, I think, really not good advice to give. I think the other side of the coin is get 1% better every day. That also, I think, is silly, because if you could get 1% better every day, then in 100 days I would be perfect. So
Mhm.
I never really like that adage either. I think get 1% better every day is also like the other side of the coin. But I think that whether you watch a 20-minute podcast, whether you take the dog for an extra walk, whether you eat one less bean burrito that day, whatever it is, like, yeah, I mean, I really do think that every day you should try to be better than the day before in some form or fashion. And it's not going to happen every day, but your mentality every day should be, I want to, and it's not, you're not competing with anybody else, but you should find a way to where you could wake up every day and tell yourself, today is going to be better than yesterday. And even if it's not, as soon as you think that you're good enough, then, I mean, where's the joy in that? Where's the fun in that? Like, when does anybody have it all figured out? The success of life is in becoming. And the only way you become is to continually learn, right? And it doesn't mean inside the four walls of a classroom. It means by living life, by experiencing things, by taking chances, by trying something new, right? Like, it could be you've never had sushi before, so you try sushi today, give it a try, right? Maybe that's something. It doesn't have to be like you take another online course. It could be something very simple, but I don't ever feel like I'm good enough. I feel like I am very good at what I do. I feel like I'm happy with where I am and I'm content, but I'm hungry to be a better version of me tomorrow every day.
And I completely agree with that. And I think, where this resonates with me personally is coming from a biracial background. My great grandfather was a sharecropper. My grandfather was born in 1930, was spit on in the streets that he lived in. My father was the first entrepreneur. And if I take that 10 generations beyond the people who I just named, imagine the sacrifices that people have gone through and the hardship that they've gone through so you can sit here and not continue to progress and push yourself to be the best version of your lineage. Like, I think about my responsibility now is to carry forward all of the missed opportunities and really try and be as pivotal as possible in taking advantage of the opportunities that I'm given that will push my lineage forward. And so whenever I read
Right.
those messages, I'm like, man, dude, like, just the society that we live in today is feeding us so many poor messages. And if we listen to what everybody else is doing, you're going to be like everybody else.
You are. And I think a great way to look at this too is, and that's something people can relate to, right? Because so many people follow, Hollywood and the famous people and this and that. I think a great way to look at it is there's a lot of people in Hollywood that have a lot of money, tons of societal, what we look at as wealth and success. And this is not to be mean, but they commit suicide, they get addicted to drugs, they have infidelity, they lose custody of their children, they get addicted to alcohol and crash their car into someone else's house, right? There's all these things that happen. And it's because they have everything that they want. Money is no issue for them. They can have whatever they want. And so they get complacent in their life and they stop improving themselves. They stay at home, they isolate, they buy things, they have nothing else to do, right? Nothing is motivating them because they have access to everything. But then you have someone who is on the complete opposite spectrum where, it could still be someone who's financially successful, but every day they're trying to improve their life, right? And it could be something very, very simple, but if you're constantly trying to improve and you're not constantly trying to just sit back and just enjoy the ride, because if you sit back and enjoy the ride, right, when you get a flat tire, it's like already too late. But if you know how to change the flat and you've got the spare tire, right? And you've got friends that you can call on to come and you've got AAA and you've got all these other things ready to go, then you can fix the car and get back on the road, right? You're not going to be left on the side of the road. And so I think that you're absolutely right. I've never understood the you're good enough. I understand where they're coming from, but I do think it is bad advice. And I always think it's amazing how that stuff does so well.
I mean, I think it's just, you know, I'm not trying to say this in a negative way whatsoever, but I feel like people are looking for validation that gives them the internal excuse of, I know I'm not applying myself to my fullest capability. And this is something that kind of resonates with me. And this person on social media who I'll never even meet is validating the lack of effort that I'm putting into performing as my best self.
Right.
And that's just super tough for me.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think that, and honestly too, like that mindset, I think is what gets people into, um, I think that mindset is what gets people into mental, you're big in the mental space. And I think that that can really get you into some bad places if you think that you're good enough, or you think that you've already gotten to where you're supposed to be, or, that this is as good as it's going to get. I think that that can really take a toll on your mind because it tricks you into thinking I can take my foot off the gas, right? It's not that you always have to be going full throttle, but you certainly don't want to, when there's an uphill or there's a challenge in life, that's not the time to let off the gas, right? When there's a downhill, you can be a little bit more relaxed, right? And those are the times when you can kind of stop and look around and embrace the little bit of success, celebrate the small wins, right? But don't get stuck there. You know what I mean? Don't sit there too long.
Yeah, I mean, that complacency is something that will come back to bite you every single time.
Yep.
You know, one of the things that I know that you'll kind of resonate with this, my girlfriend right now is going through PA school to become a physician's assistant. And one of the things that I've seen her friends struggle with is because they performed at such a high level in the framework of academia their entire life, now they're getting into a new challenging environment and they're having a really tough time adjusting when they're not performing at that same level that they've established as an expectation for themselves. And so one of the things that I continue to talk about whenever I'm around their friends is the idea of a growth mindset and the idea of continuously progressing and getting better at what we're applying ourselves to. And that in itself really is the mission. And we've really talked about that as like an overarching umbrella here today. But one of the things that I continue to come back to is when you're in the medical field, you are practicing medicine. It's not mastery of surgery, right? You are practicing in that space. And I think that that is just so important that more people should recognize is not only in medicine, but in life in general, we are in the process of practicing best practices here. And they're always changing and adapting. And we need to be able to kind of be fluid, like water through the pipes, like you were talking about, to be able to fit and form and adapt to these new environments and challenges that we come across.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's why I think that, the growth mindset or whatever you want to call it, a student for life, it's like there's this old saying that the doer learneth, right? And the only way that you're going to continue to learn or grow or move forward is literally by doing. And so I think that the medical field, the law field, right? You practice law, you practice medicine, right? There's lots that you practice veterinary. And it's not practicing like experimenting. It's practicing like I'm practicing, or like athletes are constantly practicing, right? And I really think that that's the approach people should take to life, because as soon as you think that you're a professional, right? As soon as you think that you've achieved expert status, then that means that you've reached some sort of destination, right? And then where do you go from there? The only place you can go from there, I hate to say it, is down, right? Once you put yourself at a destination, most people see a destination as a hill. And so once you get to the top of a hill, you can only go down the hill. That's it. And so if you look at life as a constant, right, like very, almost like an EKG, in the sense that there's going to be periods like this, but almost like the stock market. If you look at the stock market, there's big dips, but over time, it still slowly is always going up. Mm-hmm. And so that's how people should look at their life, is a constant hill where there's going to be a lot of valleys you have to go through. There's going to be a lot of big and small hills, but there is there's really no destination. It's just a journey. And I think that's the secret, man, is to just know that there's no pot of gold, right? That the pot of gold is in the journey.
Absolutely. Well, Bryan, this has been an absolute pleasure today. And I think that's a great place for us to kind of wrap it up. I want to use the last couple seconds here for you to let people know how they can get in contact with you, how they can find you on LinkedIn or any other space of your website. Why don't you spend the last couple seconds here kind of giving yourself a little time in the spotlight?
Yeah. Thank you, Keenan, again for having me on. This was amazing. Same goes to you. If you guys don't know him or don't follow him, you have to. He brings so much value in a space that is so needed right now. If you're looking to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me, send me a connection request, follow me, go to my profile. There's a link to my landing page where you can book a free discovery call. Let's get together and let's find a way to get you unstuck or overcome those limiting beliefs and just become more of who you already are.
Absolutely, man. Well, guys, that's been another episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. I think Bryan's done an absolutely amazing job of talking about the heart and talking about all the elements of hustle that kind of really exemplify this podcast in general. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in once again. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.